What happens in the sky affects life down here on Earth. The celestial compass shows you how and guides your way with astrology you can use from professional astrologer Kathy Biehl. Every episode features her light-hearted, practical forecasts and navigational tips, blended with humor, optimism, and a love of patterns, symbolism, and pop culture references. Kathy translates technicalities into concepts that apply to real life. You'll learn how the current moment ties to where we've been, from the recent past to cycles that last happened years ago, and get a look at where we're heading. And much more, from special topics to special guests. The Celestial Compass, enlightening, entertaining, and empowering. Here's your host, Kathy Biehl.
Greetings, Earthlings. It's Kathy Biehl of EmpowermentUnlimited.net, your host of Celestial Compass. And welcome to the June update. I will start with that before getting to introduce you to our special guest. We're at what may end up being the turning point, milestone time of the entire year. There are a number of extremely important influences converging in a gigantic cluster just before the solstice, which will take the energies and bring them, help them to play out for the next 3 months. It's a bit of a whirlwind. I used the cyclone from The Wizard of Oz as my image for the week. We have a solar eclipse this week in Gemini. It's reminiscent of one that happened in June of 2002, so you might think about themes that were going on for you then. This is a massive upgrade in a reset in what we do with our minds, the stories we tell ourselves, a gigantic laboratory in the notion of form follows thought. As Mike Dooley says, thoughts become things. With a twist this time, actually a couple of twists, because the cosmic fog machine is pumping up the mists really, really hard as this happens. Mercury is retrograde, and he's in an exact square to Neptune, and he's smack in the middle of the new moon, all of which means there's a gigantic, a heightened and accentuated air of unreality to a lot of things. And it might be difficult for you to know what's real, what's not real. Confusion could be really, really great. The Mercury retrograde snarls and snags that happen in your life could be extreme. I've certainly been a poster child for that this past weekend. I went to a store to spend a gift certificate, and it had moved, it had closed. And I went to the replacement store, and it just wasn't open. I got lost on a highway I've been driving for 20 years. I had to upgrade my phones and was sent SIM cards that weren't the right size. I could drive you nuts with my stories. So just know that you may need some reality checks. Grounding might be extremely important right now. And if you find yourself wanting to put your head in a bucket of ice cream while Venus is in Cancer, actually more likely you're going to want to feed other people the ice cream or share it with them. It's okay. It's your prerogative. The other really big event that is happening in the middle of this, adding to all of the tension, is the second of 3 challenging aspects between Saturn and Uranus. The first was the middle of February, when the power grid went down in Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma. It's exact on the 14th, but we're feeling it now. It's pushing old ways against new ways. It's testing structures, new constructs, stress testing technology, systems. And there's a personal aspect to all of this in addition to a collective aspect. And that is tied into the reboot that we're having with the solar eclipse. And both of these big events have their final playing out, their final act in December, when we have the last eclipse on the Gemini-Sagittarius axis for this round, and Saturn and Uranus make their final square on December 24th. what this means for now is gather information. It's not the end of the story yet. There's still much to discover, to test, to experience, to explore. It's very important to look for your own personal mute button, to call a time out for yourself now and again, to be quiet, to empty yourself from all of the outside stimulus, and give yourself a fighting chance to know what your own thoughts are and what your own guidance is. So, with that, I am thrilled to welcome this week's guest. Her name is Tanaaz Chubb, and she is an astrologer and an author, and she is the creator of a community online called Forever Conscious, and the author of a new book, The Ultimate Guide to Astrology, which we'll talk about quite a bit. So welcome, Tanaaz.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Could you please tell us a little bit about how you got into astrology?
Sure. So one of my really good friends growing up, I grew up in Australia, so this is back in Australia before I moved to the US where I now live. She was really into astrology. And look, she was my best friend, so she knew a lot about me. But I remember one day she offered to pull up my chart and have a look. And I just remember being blown away because, yes, while she knew a lot about me, it was the dates and like how the dates were matching up to events and the synchronicity of, periods of my life where I had certain, she was pointing out certain astrological transits and how it matched up to, timelines in my life that, it just sort of fit like a puzzle. And so that just really opened my eyes and got me really interested in astrology, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
That's my favorite moment, recurrences and cycles. My favorite moment in talking with a new client is when I mentioned when something happened previously and there is dead silence, and then they say, oh, as they connect the dots. So you got more than just the really common, oh, your sun sign is and your moon sign is. You got the full flavor of the patterns and the cycles and the progressions.
Exactly. And sorry.
No, go ahead.
I knew I was a Capricorn, but that was about the extent of it. And I had never really given astrology. I was always into like cards and palm reading. I've always been sort of that way inclined. But with astrology, I thought, oh, well, it's so generic. You read your horoscope in the paper and that's it. But yeah, I had no idea until she showed me, this chart that had other planets, and it wasn't just about being a Capricorn, And the real aha moment for me was at the time when she was looking at my chart. I had just gotten my paperwork in order to move to the US. And at the time of my flight, which was it was 11:15 a.m., it was the exact same time I was having my lunar return. And when she explained that to me, I had no idea what a lunar return was, but I just found it so crazy that this, significant alignment happening in my chart had lined up with this flight. That was a huge, pivotal moment for me, packing up and moving to the US. So, yeah, after that, I was totally hooked.
Did you take classes? Did you study with people, read a lot of books? How did you move forward with it?
Yeah, all of the above. So it began mostly with just self-study. I read lots of books. I, read a lot of stuff online, watched YouTube videos, found astrologers that, had great blogs and websites. And then I also ended up taking classes. So it's kind of a little bit of everything, but I would say mostly just from like self-study, reading, learning my chart, and then asking whoever would let me to just practice on them and practice on their charts and just learning that way.
I think a lot of people can identify with that story.
Yeah.
So how did this lead to, or what was the path that led to the Forever Conscious community?
Sure, yeah. So I'd moved to the US, I was living there, and I had picked up kind of like a freelance gig of content writing. And I basically, it was part of my job to write, articles and blog posts for all these different websites. Whatever, the client wanted, I would write. So I was writing a lot, and it was often, pretty boring stuff, nothing that interesting. And I had helped, create and build all these websites just by sort of creating content. And then sort of one day me and a friend were kind of chatting, and we both sort of thought, hey, wouldn't it be cool to create a website dedicated to things that we are interested in, like wellness and astrology and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of took off from there. It really started as a hobby and something fun to do, something that kind of, take me out of the monotony of what I was doing. And then it kind of took off and then turned into what it is today.
What kind of information can people find there? And there's a community too, right?
Yeah, just through social media. So it's foreverconscious.com, and then we have, Instagram and Facebook, and I have a YouTube channel, but just mostly astrology. I would say that's probably the, predominant topic on the site, but we also tap into tarot. I have a lovely Nikki. She writes weekly tarot articles, and I'll have some guest authors that all sort of in the realm of crystals and alternative healing, spirituality, all in that sort of realm.
It sounds like a lot of fun. I mean, I have looked through it, and you have diverse information there and very nicely presented. So I encourage people to go look for this. And how did this lead, or what led you to come up with the idea for the ultimate guide to astrology?
Well, I was actually approached by Fair Winds or Quarter, who have the publishers of the book, and one of the editors was a fan of the site, and she said, "We are looking for somebody to, contribute to this book. Would you be interested?" And writing an astrology book was high up on my, bucket list of things to do. So it just seemed like a perfect fit.
And how did you come up with the approach of the book?
Yeah, so I really wanted to do something that would help people do this for themselves. I really like that, being able to empower people. Like, it's one thing to listen to an astrologer, come to the site, read the blog. Obviously, I want people to do that. But there's a power in knowing how to do it yourself and understanding the basics so you can sort of take what you read and, have it sort of go into the deeper layers, really kind of dig deep with it. So that was my goal. I wanted to create something that would allow a beginner to look at a chart and just gain insight about, where the planets were, what that might mean, what that might unlock for them. I sort of think of the chart as, like a little bit of a blueprint for your soul. And, being able to sort of decode and work with that through your entire life, there's a power in that. And I wanted to be able to offer that to people.
And I noticed that for every placement that you discuss, the sun, the moon, the planets, you don't just talk about that particular body in a sign, you also talk about it in a house. So you give more integrated information at the outset in how you present this. And that was a conscious decision, I'm guessing. Yes, definitely.
I think houses are so important, in the chart. And I wanted to give people a little taste of that. The word, I could have gone on and on. But obviously I had to stick within a word count. But yeah, I wanted to give people just a little taste of being able to understand, not just the planets, not just what sign they were in, but also where in the chart they're located and what that means.
And I noticed that it's common to get an emphasis on the rising sign, the sun and the moon, but you put one of the first novel aspects of the book that I noted here, you put the nodes up front in the discussion, the nodes of the moon. Can you elaborate on why you gave them that place of honor and what you think that means?
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, I just think of them as being quite important. I sort of look at them as, an understanding of where our soul has been and where we're kind of heading. And I think that kind of becomes like a key ingredient in understanding, okay, yes, sun, moon, and rising, they're definitely key things in a chart. But then you've got this, a little bit of a sort of a more esoteric aspect there with the lunar nodes that can help us understand, maybe past lives, maybe past things that our soul had mastered or was, had been through, and then how we're kind of channeling that into this life and maybe into other lifetimes beyond this.
So it's a little bit more of a navigational piece.
Yeah, I think so.
And you, looking for my notes here, hold on. You see the nodes karmic debts and what we have come in to achieve.
Yeah.
For the South Node and the North Node.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just for people who are listening and going, what? I mean, I think most people have a sort of an understanding of what the nodes are, but they're a mathematical calculation, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's not something you can look in the sky and go, oh, I see my moon's node.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, we are coming up on the first break, so I think I'm going to stop us just a tiny bit early here. And everyone, stick around, come back in a couple of minutes for more about the book.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Life is a flow, and enlightenment is simply harmonizing with the way life really is. Then you find that life is effortless, benevolent, and free of all suffering. Hey everyone, this is GP Walsh, and I want to invite you to my brand new radio show that's launching right here on OMTimes Radio called The Flow of Enlightenment. I've been a spiritual teacher for decades, and my greatest pleasure is being able to share with you these deep and highly practical spiritual ideas. So join me in The Flow every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern and let yourself be transformed.
Want help with your own celestial compass? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, for Astro Insight forecasts for each week, month, and new and full moon. Want to explore the personal impact? Make a decision? Understand another person? It is possible. Click the Services tab to book a personal session with me. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We're talking with Tanaaz Chubb, astrologer and author of The Ultimate Guide to Astrology, which has just been published by Four Winds Press, an imprint of the Quarto Group. How did you decide how you wanted to structure the information in the book?
I kind of just laid it out in what I thought was kind of the, first step, like what's the first thing you have to understand, and then how do you kind of go build on from there. So yeah, I thought about what the end goal was, and then sort of all the little pieces that needed to kind of fit into place to reach that end goal. Kind of working backwards to begin with as I kind of came out with the layout and how I wanted it all to flow.
Sounds like Capricornian project management.
Yes, yes. I have to say that I have a Virgo moon. I have a Gemini rising as well, and so that's helpful too. But I really think it's that earthy Capricorn Virgo that's like, okay, let's get concrete with this.
Well, and that I see that tying in with what you said at the beginning of your visit with us about how you got interested in astrology because at the outset you were exposed immediately to notions of cycles and recurrences and patterns. Because one thing that struck me about your book, and I don't believe I have seen this elsewhere, is working the notion of phases and cycles into the discussion of each new body as it's introduced. That I have typically seen as, next level, like now that you got the basics down, now that you understand the
Mhm.
elements, that sort of thing. But no, you work it in from the very outset. And I'm guessing that was just a matter of fact, a normal way to do it because of how you've been exposed to astrology?
Yeah, and it's also, I think, kind of what I find like so interesting. And I wanted to be able to include that because I do feel like it's kind of like, at least for me, part of like the juicy stuff of astrology is being able to kind of track cycles and look at the bigger picture. Definitely, there's that, and I think my website is a little bit of a reflection of that because I don't just sort of do horoscopes. I do collective sort of energy forecasts. And I don't know, for me, I just find that more interesting. Definitely the personal stuff, it's so important and it kind of gives greater context to those collective forecasts. But yeah, that was just a little piece of just, I think, me and like what I find super interesting about astrology.
I often call what I do continuum astrology because nothing happens from that. Nothing is in the moment. There's always a where we came from and where we're going to aspect to it all. And you introduce that, you weave it into the understanding of a chart from the outset. I mean, you talk about phases of the moon and the notion of Mercury retrograde, the dread Mercury retrograde. You introduce that at the outset, like, okay, this is part of it.
Yeah,
um,
and I think, sorry, just on the Mercury
no,
retrograde thing,
please.
I think it's become such a popular, common, almost like, mainstream thing, people talking about Mercury retrograde. So that's also why I thought, let's just dive in with this.
There is so much. It's almost like Hallmark took it over, and Hallmark has cards for every holiday, including many that the company dreamed up, and now everybody has something to say about Mercury retrograde, and a lot of it is a little suspect. So I was glad that you grounded that from the beginning in your discussion of this.
Yeah.
But I did notice, so you have some interesting things you say about Venus and Mars. I don't believe I've ever run across a first level astrology book talking about the notion of the morning star and the evening star for Venus. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, again, that was just, another thing that I thought and found was really interesting and wanted to include it, not just to sort of, I guess, partly to be different from the other books out there, but also because, it's one of those things that for me, they're like, I don't know, little gateways. Oh, this is so interesting. I want to keep diving deeper. So I wanted to kind of, sprinkle the book with things that I felt kind of, would get people, like, even a little more excited than hopefully they already are when they're looking at it. So yeah, that's why I decided to include about, Venus as a morning star, evening star. I also think it helps to understand the energy of Venus, sort of having these two personalities in a way, the sort of shadow feminine and then the lighter feminine. If you want to look at it that way, I just thought it was kind of an interesting way to understand the Venus energy from another angle.
And if someone looked at this and said, "Oh, I have a morning star Venus," what would that mean for them?
Well, I go into it in the book, but it sort of shows how and, where that Venus energy might be expressed for them the most. Doesn't mean that they don't have, the sort of more shadow side that you might get with someone as the evening star Venus. But I sort of, in my intuitive sense with astrology, because I do rely on my intuition a lot, people who are born under the morning star Venus, part of their purpose is sort of learning how to express their love in an external way, whereas somebody with an evening star Venus, maybe that manifests in more of an internal way.
And how does the rose of Venus fit into all of this? That was a concept I actually had not come in contact with before, the 5-petal flower.
Oh, yeah. So, it's just the pattern that Venus makes, as it moves through its cycle. If you were to kind of draw it out, it creates a perfect, petaled flower, a beautiful geometric shape. And that kind of links it to sacred geometry a little bit, and looking at, I don't know, it kind of intertwines, and we start thinking, at least it gets me thinking about the universe as a bigger picture. So looking at that and the cycles of Venus, again, just another way to kind of understand this planet and the energy, and how that cycle, how you can map it and, see how it manifests in your life.
So I think I have run into this as a 5-pointed star that you can actually track out. So I just hadn't heard it as a flower before. So you can follow basically how it's playing out in your life over time using this sacred geometry. Okay.
Yes. And it's actually very similar to the star. It's just, star flower. It's still this, pentagram or 5-petaled, flower, which, takes that 8 years to sort of be completed.
You also go in quite a bit with Mars, talking about Mars from a perspective that I had not quite seen laid out in a book before. I like to call him the planet of push, or cosmic first responder. You talk about Mars cycles, the Mars return, and the Mars opposition. So how would it be important for someone who's just getting a handle on what their chart is doing? How would this help them flesh out their understanding of how they push themselves out into the world?
Yeah, I think it would help them to sort of, again, just get that deeper, that next layer of understanding. So the book is kind of set out where, you'll have your chart, you'll be able to see, okay, I was born with Mars, in this sign. Okay, cool. That's what that means. Okay, it's in this house, this part of the chart. That's what that means. And then let's kind of go that extra little step and have a look and see when I'm having my Mars return or when I'm having my Mars opposition. And the book kind of explains how you would figure that out. And then what's happening in my life. And then it kind of brings it to life a little bit. You're able to kind of see it in action a little bit more. At least that was my hope when including that in the book, to sort of people can kind of see the planet and its energy in operation. Because, we're born with these, when you're doing natal chart analysis, that's what you're born with. Sometimes it can be very hard to know any different, right? Because that's how you're born and you don't know any different. Your Mars has always been in this sign and that's how it is and that's how it'll forever be. But when you start looking at things and sort of taking it to that level of like, okay, I'm having my Mars return. What does that mean? This is how I can find it out. And then what's actually happening in this point of my life when I'm having my Mars return? I kind of feel like, if that makes sense, it kind of brings it to life a little bit.
And a return, for people listening, is when a planet comes back to the spot that it occupied when you were born, or when a particular event happens, when the return for an event. So in this case, it's your birth. So a Mars return would be when Mars comes back to the sign and degree that it occupied at your birth. So the opposition would be when it's exactly opposite that.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
And a Mars cycle runs about 2 years, 2.5 years. So This is something that you can you could just track your life fairly easily without a lot of difficulty, and see what sorts of things tend to get you going at different times, or where you find yourself investing your energy, or how you find yourself investing your energy, would seem to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I noticed that you put Saturn and Jupiter together in your discussion, and you call them gateway planets. Can you elaborate on that notion?
Yeah, so I wanted to kind of categorize the planets a little bit. And I know this is not something that, I came up with. Mercury, Venus, Mars, they're typically referred to as the personal planets. And then you've got your outer planets, which are, like Pluto and the ones far out there. But then when I was thinking about Jupiter and Saturn, and then even Chiron a little bit, which unfortunately I ran out of word count to go into Chiron, but when I think about those planets, I just felt like a good way to describe them was gateway planets, gateways into these outer planets, which I kind of have always thought about as planets of higher consciousness. So kind of moving from that personal, layer, the personal planets that kind of give our more sort of superficial personality, you could say, and then moving into these other planets where, they sort of tap into like more of the higher consciousness, the energy is a little more subtle. So just to kind of elaborate and explain on that, if people are like, what is she talking about? Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto very often are considered, planets of higher consciousness, or their energy is a little more subtle. They move very slowly. So their effects on our lives are going to be, slow to build, subtle, over a longer period of time, as compared to something, say, like Mars and Venus and Mercury that move pretty quickly and are always kind of fluid. And so the planets in between that, Jupiter and Saturn, I kind of feel can be a bridge, helping us move out of that sort of more superficial layers into the deeper layers. I hope that kind of makes sense, but that's how I sort of thought about it in my mind when I was thinking about sort of the arc of the planets.
Bridge does make a lot of sense, as the personal planets really do have a lot to do with your daily life, your immediate life, and then there are these bridges that take you to another way of looking at it is an experience that's more generational or more collective, hitting a lot of people around the same age in a somewhat similar way, with slower moving influences. I like to spend a little time talking about Jupiter, because it's a kind of slippery guy. People tended to say, oh, it's expansion, it's beneficence, it's optimism, it's all these different things. What if you're looking at someone's chart, you wouldn't look at Jupiter alone, I don't think, or would you? What's
No,
your take
I mean,
on that guy?
yeah, definitely. Like I don't really look at any planets on their own. I kind of like to look at it like, the whole holistic bigger picture, which I guess is very a Jupiter thing anyway. But yeah, I think of Jupiter, I mean, yes, Jupiter definitely gets this lovely glowing reputation. It's the planet of gifts and luck. And, I think of it as the planet of expansion. It kind of expands whatever it touches. And, I think it's up to our own judgments whether that's good or bad, or whether you consider that lucky or unlucky. But I think beyond that duality of good, bad, I think it's I consider it the planet of expansion, and it can bring abundance. And that abundance, again, is sort of connected to that expansion. What is it expanding in your life? What is it really trying to show you? It's going to, magnify that so you can see it, look at it, and either appreciate it or maybe change it,
And then the Jupiter return would be pretty much every 12 years. So that's a nice chunk of time for reviewing your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have seen Jupiter returns coincide with truly horrendous times in people's lives. And for others, really, really good. So this kind of points up, depends on what he's touching,
Yeah, exactly. How would you talk about Jupiter? What does Jupiter sort of mean to you?
Well, I say he's the guy that ups the ante of any action he gets near. All right. So if Jupiter gets activated, it's just going to bring more of whatever it's touching. And people say, well, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Part of it is perspective. I find a very useful mantra in dealing with Jupiter or analyzing it is show me how this benefits me, because often something that you are experiencing in a not entirely pleasant way while it's playing out turns out to be a great gift. That's pretty Jupiterian right there, seems to me. And it can be a very indulgent influence. It's not an influence of work. It doesn't necessarily reward work, although it can bring rewards. So that's some of what I think about it. Now, there is another guy that does definitely reward work, and I would like to hold off moving our discussion to Saturn until after the next break, which we will take right now. Be back in a couple of minutes. Hang with us, everybody.
Bringing a more conscious lifestyle to your world. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
How would you like navigational tools you can use on your own? Visit my site, empowermentunlimited.net, and click the Shop tab. There you'll find lots of talks and guides explaining the big influences at work now, like Saturn in Aquarius and Uranus in Taurus. You'll also find a variety of guided visualizations for relaxing, clearing your energy, or getting to know planetary archetypes. That address again, empowermentunlimited.net.
Grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine and tune in for Inspired Conversations with publisher Linda Joy on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. Linda creates sacred space for leading female luminaries, empowering authors, heart-centered female entrepreneurs, coaches, and healers. A soulful venue where guests openly share the fears and obstacles they've overcome, wisdom and lessons learned, and the personal journey that led them to the transformational work they do in the world. Inspired Conversations to empower you on your path to authentic, soulful living.
If I could be you,
and you could be me for just 1 hour,
if you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind,
walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out, and for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back to Celestial Compass. We are talking with Tanaaz Chubb, the author of The Ultimate Guide to Astrology by Four Winds Press, an imprint of the Quarto Group. And we've been talking about gateway planets, and which brings me to Saturn, the old guy with, well, anyway. People have all kinds of intense reactions to him. I see you call him the Lord of Karma, correct?
Yes.
And I like how, well, your book does immediately introduce the notion of not just a Saturn return, but the first stage of a person's development in his relationship with Saturn by mentioning Saturn square, opposition, square, return. that's actually pretty technical, but it seems to fit very much with the approach that you've been laying out here. So just what do you think about Saturn? I guess is the way to throw this at. I call him the party pooper of the zodiac, but he also rewards hard work. You know, the planet of adulting. You act like an adult, you will get the rewards of being an adult.
You know, Saturn, I think really, earns its name as the gateway planet because I find a lot of people, and maybe it's just my age group, but a lot of people tend to discover astrology while they're having their Saturn return. You know, I can't tell you how many times, a friend will comment on something and I'll be like, oh, that's so Saturn return. And they'll be like, what are you talking about? And then, the conversation launch and suddenly they want to know more. So I feel like Saturn return is almost kind of becoming like a Mercury Retrograde, like a Hallmark card. Like we'll need Hallmark cards for Saturn return. It's definitely gaining in popularity. So I knew it was something people were interested in. So I wanted to kind of give a little bit more than just, okay, this is the Saturn return. Well, to understand the Saturn return, you have to kind of like what you were saying, understand where you've come from and how it plays out in, after the fact, where you're heading with it. So I wanted to include that so people can kind of trace it back to, age 7 when you have your first Saturn square Saturn, and it sort of go through, okay, that age group. And obviously it's a little bit hard for people to remember what they were doing at that age group. But, being able to track that cycle, again, it's just another tool of empowerment and being able to understand it on a deeper level for yourself.
And the first one that I think really can get people's attention if they start thinking about it is the first Saturn opposition, because that coincides with a bridge moment. At least maybe these things have changed culturally, but certainly when I was growing up, that time was a real testing period between, are you a kid? You're not quite an adult, like adolescent testing ground, it seemed to me. Very strong around that period.
Yeah, it's a good way to look at it.
And then the second square, after it's made the opposition, is in your early 20s, around 21. And for a lot of people, they're starting to decide, what am I going to do for a living? Or they're wrapping up some form of education. Or maybe they're still just trying to figure out who they are, very likely. What sorts of things do you observe being hallmarks of the Saturn return around the age of 29?
I've seen all sorts of different things, but usually it's either something to do with a complete career change. Like one of my friends who I had this exact conversation with, she was, had always studied interior design and, had spent her, good decade working in interior design, studying it at university, now working at this really, great firm. And she just kind of has hit a place in her life where, just things it wasn't what she thought it was. It wasn't what she thought it would be. And then, she kind of is feeling all these different emotions. Should I change? Is that silly? Should I keep going? And then when I kind of, made a little joking reference about Saturn return, she went and looked it up and now she's an astrologer. That's like one of my favorite stories.
That's great.
Yeah. And so, that's, I think, a really cool example of reaching a point in your life. I guess I would put it this way. If Saturn is asking you, what do you want to take responsibility for? What this is your life. You need to take responsibility for it. So if you're not happy, if you're in a marriage, if you're in a job, if you're in a, whatever situation, and it's not going how you want it to go, how are you going to take responsibility for that? And I think on the other side, where if we haven't been taking responsibility, as you mentioned, Saturn can kind of come along and go, okay, now you're going to kind of be forced to take ownership of what you've been doing, how you've been living your life. So that can kind of be a wake-up call for people. It sounds harsh, and I know it can be for a lot of people. Saturn return that period of your life from, 28 to 30, it can be a really hard time for a lot of people, but it is that sort of maturation point, that real growth point that then sort of elevates you to that next chapter of your life. And I think, a lot of people really resonate with that time period, being something significant happening and then kind of growing from it, which again is why I think it's a good sort of gateway into astrology, because so many people can identify and recognize that in their life.
I've often found, looking at in terms of the how solid your foundations are at that age, and if you've been using your energy appropriately and investing in something appropriately, the foundations get really solid and the platform gets really strong. And if not, well, it can just collapse right out from under you.
Yep.
Which is a different way of looking at it than the responsibility, but it has the same kind of impact on what happens out in your world. So your description in the book already loads this notion in at the front. It front loads the idea that you will be called upon to review and account for yourself, answer for yourself at various really reliably predictable times in your life. Bam, bam, bam.
Yeah. Yep.
And then we get to the, the planets of higher consciousness, and you do bring some cycles into play in your description of those, Uranus being the awakener, which is a gentle way of saying what Uranus can do to people. Neptune having to do with dreams, and then, well, Pluto is its own thing. The Pluto square. It seems like these three planets have regularly scheduled events that really invite rethinking what you've been doing with your life. So again, you're loading at the outset the description of these energies. As someone reads the book, they're not just getting, oh, I was born in the generation that has Neptune in Virgo. This is what this means. Nope, it's more than that.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm that was sort of my hope too with writing, that part of the book, because it is, the sign that your Pluto is in, for example, that's very generational. But yeah, I wanted to kind of offer what that meant, definitely give context to that, but then kind of go that extra step and go, okay, how can I really start to understand how this might manifest? What, times in my life will this planet, be most active for for most people at this time, the Pluto square, age 36 to 39, that's something that we all experience collectively. So how can we tap into that and then try and understand this planet and how it might show up in our lives in a deeper way?
And the Uranus opposition is a little later than that in age. And I kind of associate them both like together, a protracted midlife crisis. Like, what am I doing with myself? Which people can experience in very different ways depending on whether their head is in the sand or if they're actually looking at things. So those three, do you look at those three together, basically? I mean, I know you look at everything, but if you're looking at someone's chart, people do tend to focus on the cluster of the sun, the moon, and the rising sign to get the general pulse of things. But when you pull it all in and then you bring these others in, are you mindful of what age the person is and what might be going on with these different planetary cycles?
Yeah, definitely. I will say, I'll look at everything, but for some reason, and maybe this is part of my own chart, I love Pluto. my eye, definitely I'll look at your sun, I'll look at the moon, the rising, anything obvious that's sort of jumping out. But, typically I'll always want to see what Pluto is doing. I have a little bit, I don't want to play favorites, but I feel like Pluto is one of my favorite planets to look at. I don't know, again, I've always sort of taken an intuitive approach to astrology. I don't know if that has something to do with it, but for me, when I look at Pluto in the chart, I don't know, that's where my intuitive juices sort of become unlocked for some reason. It's looking at Pluto and it's sort of, not starting with that, but definitely a big part. I don't do readings so much anymore, but when I did, for some reason, it was Pluto that always had me fascinated.
Might it have anything to do with Pluto plowing through Capricorn these days?
Yeah, maybe. Definitely, maybe. Do you have a favorite planet? So if you're looking at someone's chart, is there a planet that you'll always, or is it kind of they're all equal?
Well, actually, what I have found is a little different. I still do a lot of readings, and I have found that people who come tend to have current major transits directly hitting something in their chart. So that's a little different than, okay, do I always look at the moon? I mean, I know some people who always look at the sun and the nodes together, and that's their starting point. My starting point is always what's getting triggered for you right now, and where does this fit in with earlier points in your life. But I found that, again, there are actually two things. Either whatever the really strong transits are right now are directly hammering people who come to me, or they have direct links to my ninth house planets and my moon, almost without fail. Very strange, but that what happens. That is what happens on my end. So, and I do think that every little group of age group seems to have its own theme, and I will focus in on that. I have dealt a lot with people who were born between 1965 and 1968, when Uranus and Pluto were conjunct in Virgo, and especially since the Uranus-Pluto square of 2012 to 2019, it's been as if their programming has been activated and they've been coming online. And that does seem to be a theme, and that's something that always jumps out at me, that pair together. So, yeah, there are different generational signatures. There are certain boomers that have Jupiter and Pluto and Leo together, that sort of thing. So I have many I look at. I guess is the way to put it. How would someone, going back to your book here, when they get to the end of it, how might they put it all together?
Yeah, well, I hope by the time they've reached the end of the book, they kind of have all the information, and they're able to kind of then sit and digest it. And, the coming together of it all is sort of a natural process. But yeah, I'm sort of hoping that the little bits of information, because, in order to understand something, sometimes we have to dissect it, right, and look at it separately. But really, you want to try to get that holistic picture. So hopefully, once you've understood all those little pieces, that you can then kind of put it together and go, oh, okay, and that takes time. Even with me and my own chart, I'm still learning. I'm still, I'm sure you probably feel the same way. Astrology, the study of astrology sometimes feels endless. There are so many new things to learn. And, even when I look at my chart, I might notice something new every single time I look at it. So, it's definitely a growing and a learning process. But I hope once they're done with the book, the readers are going to have a really, really nice foundation that will set them up for further study and exploration.
And again, the book is The Ultimate Guide to Astrology, published by Four Winds Press, which is an imprint of the Quarto Group. And would you tell everyone where they can find you, your website, and your different social media handles?
Sure. So foreverconscious.com is the website, and then I'm on Instagram. It's at Forever Conscious. Same on Facebook. If you search for Forever Conscious, I'm sure we'll pop up.
And you have a YouTube channel also?
Oh, yes. Thank you. I forgot about that one. Again, the channel is Forever Conscious. So if you search Forever Conscious, you'll find that. And if you have trouble with any of that, if you just go to the website foreverconscious.com, you can find links to all the social channels from there as well.
That's very consistent branding. I salute you.
Yeah, keep it simple.
And it's been a pleasure talking with you, and I wish you great success with the book. And I look forward to seeing what else you do. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm Kathy Biehl, and you can find my forecasts at OMTimes.com and EmpowermentUnlimited.net. Talk to you again in 2 weeks.